coming up.
Told that even if you tell me, don't look into this, because you and I both know what will happen. They'll say, well, I told Rob and he didn't do anything about it, right?
And he didn't.
So in today's video, we are breaking down culture in the TikTok era, quiet quitting and quiet firing. Those have kind of been buzzwords that have been thrown around lately. Oh, and does every workplace need a therapist? We're going to be unpacking a lot of that stuff. So today I'm super excited because I have a friend of mine who we worked at two different companies together in our past, and we are reconnecting today just to kind of break a bunch of stuff down, have a little fun, and hopefully give you something to take away. So again, my name's Rob. I am on a mission to share what I've learned at these amazing companies I've worked at over the past 27 years in human resources, and share what I've learned there with you. So hopefully you could land your dream job, get that promotion, or just survive corporate America. So today I'm talking to my friend Anthony Lizano. Tell my audience who you are, kind of give us a little bit of your background, and then we'll go from there.
You know, I've been doing HR for about 15 plus years, and I fell into the career. It wasn't something that I went to school for. I did my master's in psychosocial behavior, marriage and family therapy, my bachelor's in actual marketing and research. So funny enough that I fell into this field, which is amazing. It's something that I can't say that I regret, because it's an amazing career field. Just the amount of things you can do within HR. So been doing this for 15 plus years, and have worked for Fortune 50 companies, have learned so much from each and every one of them. It's an adventure every day. That's what I tell people. I say, if you work in HR, there's never a dull moment, right? Never.
You never know who's going to
That's
walk
the
in your
crazy
office or what's going to be on the other end of your phone when it rings, right? And it always makes for a good story.
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
Just for a little more context for our viewers, you know, Anthony and I worked at two companies together, one being, I think, a now defunct company called Radio Shack. That's where we met. And then we both were at PepsiCo and Frito-Lay together. You know, we were talking about culture, right? And I had a great conversation with a former boss and mentor of mine from Southwest Airlines last week, who, you know, culture was everything. Back in the day at Southwest, it was all about the culture and everything. So over your, you know, and we've both got diverse careers from a company standpoint. So over your career, how have you seen culture shift, either broadly or kind of, you know, specific to each of the organizations you worked at?
So first of all, I think culture is so important for an organization, right? And what I mean culture is, you know, building that foundation for the employees, right? That they come to work every day and they love what they do, but also, you know, expressing to them and showing them that the company practices what they preach, right? At the end of the day. And you see it fluctuate in so many different companies, right? You see companies that do it really well, and you see companies that have done it really well, and then it's just fallen and dwindled down, right? They put more emphasis on the ROI. What's the ROI on that? Why do we need to do this? And, you know, when I've sat with C-suites, I've always expressed to them, your biggest ROI are your employees. If your employees are happy and the culture is thriving, those employees are going to work so much harder. Your customers are going to be so happy, right? So that in and of itself is your ROI. I mean, it just comes back twofold, completely. And depends on which generation you're asking, right? What generation are you asking? So it all depends. I mean, now you have so many different generations sitting in the workplace that it's just, it depends who you ask.
Well, and, you know, I think one thing we were discussing last week was culture is more than pizza parties or, you know,
absolutely
kind of punishment, as I would call it, right? You know, I think it's about the value, the company that has their values put up on a wall, but they also, you see the values in action, right? They're just not just a plaque on a wall to say we have values, right? And I think that builds, to your point, it builds trust with the employees, and therefore you get better performance out of them because they identify personally with the values of the organization.
And you know, I'll share something with you. In organizations that I've worked, that the leadership is very transparent right? They don't sugarcoat anything
Hmm.
for anybody. They don't hide anything. If the company is going through a change, if things are happening and you let the people know, they will back you 100%. Now, if you sugarcoat things and you don't say things and you keep things undercover, that's where culture starts dwindling, right? Because now the
Yeah.
trust is gone. And I'll share something with you. When we worked at PepsiCo, I don't know if you remember this. We started going into Stephen Covey's Speed of Trust. Do you remember that? When
Oh
the
yeah. Oh
whole
yeah.
company went
Yeah.
right? And the and what we were trying to accomplish was, instead of working in silos, right? The different pieces of the portfolio working in their own silos, they wanted to do the power of one. Do you remember that? And
Oh
we
yeah.
stood behind the Speed of Trust. We even had
Yep.
Stephen Covey come and speak to us, and we actually we bled that book. We read it. We
Yeah.
would have classes about it. We would do workshops. I mean, everybody was immersed in the Speed of Trust. And what did that do for us? I mean, our company just exploded, right? More than it was already, because that culture of people trusting, right? And feeling that they worked in an environment that was transparent, and you could trust your leader, and your leader was going to speak to you and tell you the truth. People were thriving. It was just
Yeah.
it was incredible. It truly was.
Yep.
So I think, yeah, trust. If the employees trust you, and like you said, the whole pizza party, I mean, that's great, but people don't want that.
Yeah.
People want to come to work and know and feel recognized and appreciated, and love what they do, and love who they work
Yeah.
for. That's the big thing, right?
Absolute 100%. And I'm so glad you brought up the speed of trust. I will say, you and I have been to countless workshops, the workshop du jour, whatever, whatever it was, right? The flavor of the week. And
True.
of all of them, going to DISC or Myers-Briggs or all that, I got the most out of the speed of trust stuff, because I was like, I can take that and actually implement it in my world, both
Yeah.
in my work with my clients or work with my team, and
Yes.
or even with my boss, right? And how do we build that trusting relationship? And it just cut through such other bullshit that we didn't need in the way, and we got right to, we could get a
Absolutely.
lot of work done. And
Yeah.
I also thought, especially with my boss, she and I were very different, like polar
Right.
opposites in style, right? And we had the fact that we were different and we had a trusting relationship actually allowed us to work better in tandem,
No doubt.
and get a lot more stuff done. Matter of fact, she used to tell me, she's like, "Hey, you go talk to these people." I'm like, "Why?" She's like, "Because they like you better." but but she
Yeah,
trusted
you
me to
got to
go
work on each
even
other's
do
strengths, right?
100%. But she trusted me
Yeah.
to go get it done, and but allowed me and trusted me to do it my way. And that was an
Yeah,
unlock for me, and I'm
absolutely.
forever grateful for working for her, because she was such a fantastic leader, and an all around good human too. We got to talk about the TikTok era culture. So I'm going to throw that
Wow.
back to you. What is that? What does that mean to you?
Absolutely. So everything's changed, right? When
Hmm.
it comes to, the workplace, right? So everything now is viral, everything's social media. People carry this thing with them at all times. And guess what? Now there's no secret, you know? And
Yeah.
even though companies try to put policies into place, people get around it some way, somehow. I mean, if I could tell you, people call me all the time and say, hey, this person was filming a video. I'm not sure if this is, against company policy. So I have to take a look at the video. And I'm like, they did nothing wrong. They're not wearing her name tag. They're not showing where they work. They're just saying, this is a day in the life of what I do, which is amazing, right? Because it's just giving that person, exposure, and they're happy, I guess, if they're going to be filming where they work, and they're showcasing their workplace without showing names. That means that they enjoy what they do, right? So, but then you can have the other side where people are not very happy where they work, and they expose their leaders and things like that, or talk trash. And then you get the comments on the whole TikTok, and they're like, "Oh, where do you work?" And then the person spills the beans. or somebody
Yeah,
recognizes them, right? So somebody not them
totally.
themselves, they don't say anything, but somebody says, "Oh, that person works in XYZ," and they're like, "Ooh, okay." I think we're in a time where we have to reevaluate as different organizations try to navigate through this. Where again, listen, at the end of the day, it goes back to trust, right? If people
Hmm.
feel comfortable at work, they love what they do, they're not going to put you in an ugly light, right? They're not going to talk ugly about the company.
Yes.
So what could we do to get to that place where we say we embrace that? I remember one time I worked for this company, and the leader could not understand how the employee could be doing her job while on her actual desk she was watching a soap opera, right? And I
Mm.
said, "Can I ask you a question?" I said, "Is her work getting done? Is she efficient? Is she effective?" And he said, "Oh, yeah, above and beyond. She's great." So why does it bother you if she has her phone on her desk? You got to remember that this generation that he was talking about grew up with five different electronics on at all times, and they could still function,
Right.
right? So it's just helping the different generations embrace each other. And I feel that when that takes place, the impact that is made in that team, let's suppose it's just one team that kind of has people from all walks of life, right? um, becomes so much stronger because they're able to embrace, like, oh, I see your point of view, oh, I get it now, oh, that makes sense,
Right.
right? What I always tell my leaders, I always say, you got to embrace change because change is inevitable. It's going to happen. You either embrace it or you don't, right? And I always use the example of Blockbuster and Netflix, right? I always say, look
Yeah.
what happened to Blockbuster, because they weren't willing to innovate, to change, to be different, right? Companies really need to take a deep dive into the new generation that's coming into the workplace. And what do we do to keep them? But I think, like always, humans always look at the bad first instead of the
Right.
good stuff, right? What could happen? What could be positive about this? Instead, we look at, oh my God, how are we going to get into trouble? Or how is this person going to
Right.
expose us? Or what's going to happen, right? You shouldn't be worried about that if we are doing the right thing every day, right?
You just described how, as an HR professional, you've evolved over time because back in the day, we might have been very, we've taken a police stance, right? Oh, HR
Right,
showing up.
right.
You can't say a bad word. You can't do this. You can't do that, right? You're now shifted your mindset to saying, okay, is that a bad thing that she's watching a soap opera? Or she's getting her work done, right? So your
Right.
coaching has evolved. But the question I
Absolutely.
have is, and I've seen people post this, is HR your friend or your foe? How would you answer that question?
We've evolved so much, and truly what's
Mhm.
worked for me and how I've always kind of tried to be that employee advocate and still, take care of the organization, is being very transparent with the organization and saying, this is what's coming to play right now, this is what this employee is kind of expressing and what they're going through. And instead of thinking of HR, right, like if we could date ourselves, but when it used to be personnel, right, and
Mm,
they would walk around with boxes and terminate people. I always use
totally.
this example. I always say, that's not HR. HR is here to do so many different things within an organization. And people just think that we terminate people every day and that's our job, right? If it was that easy, I mean, truly it's so much more than that, right? For me, I always say I never terminate an employee. Never. I don't, right?
Mm,
Because what I do
they
is
did.
when I have a conversation with the employee, I transfer ownership and I tell that employee, if we have to sit here again, you will be terminating yourself. I'm not going to terminate you. I don't want to terminate you. I transferred ownership. I'm not the bad guy, right? I don't
Yeah.
want you to think of HR as we're the bad guy. We didn't do this to you. We kind of gave you everything you needed to be successful, and you chose not to go that route because you said the right thing. People, don't joke in front of HR or don't curse or don't be yourself. I mean, no, we want people to be themselves, right? Because if we were all just robots and everybody was the same, what a boring environment we would be in, right?
And let's
So,
be real. I've been to these HR parties. We're some of the worst
oh my
offenders. We're the
God,
most inappropriate people.
When we're all together, we're like, oh my God, we finally could be ourselves, right? Because people don't act like
Exactly.
themselves around us.
We do have to straddle the line of being the trusted advisor to the business, right? But also the
Absolutely.
employee advocate. And I do see some HR people lean too heavily on being, a risk mitigator for the business and
Absolutely.
not,
Absolutely.
not balancing out, okay, I have to, look at this objectively and actually
True.
be an advocate for the employee if the situation warrants it. What I say to employees too is like, hey, if you're going to come talk to me, I welcome that. I'm going to help challenge you. I'm going to listen, all the things. But if you tell me something that is, like say a harassment issue, I've got to look into it. I can't just hold that, even if you tell me, don't look into this, because you and I both know what will happen. They'll say, well, I told
Great.
Rob and he didn't do anything about it,
Right.
right?
And we've learned our lessons. So yes, I agree with
Totally.
you 100%. It's playing that balance, right? You got to play the balance.
Yep.
You're not too much on this side, not too much on the other side. And truly listen, at the end of the day, I always tell people this. If you are in HR, you have to like people. And you'd be surprised how many people that are in HR that I've worked with don't like people. And I always say, why are you doing this? Why don't you go into finance? Why don't you go into something else that you don't interact with humans? And they're like, I don't know. I just fell into it. I'm like, you're doing yourself a dissatisfaction and the employee a dissatisfaction.
And I've had those days where I'm like, I'm over people. I'm done. I can't.
I know. I get you. I get you. But it just for me, I truly enjoy humans. And I think that when people feel your energy and they feel that, you are the HR, but you're a true human at your core and you speak to them as humans, I think you get so much out of out of employees. Like seriously, like
100%.
you see such results, you see such a change, and they're like, nobody has ever spoken to me this way, right? Like nobody's helped me
Hmm.
understand the things that they're not sure of, because again,
Yeah.
that in the business world, for the most part, we promote people because they want to make a little bit more money, and then we put them into leadership roles, right?
Hmm.
Because that's the only way to get them a little bit more money, and they don't know how to lead. They don't know how to have the difficult conversations with their employees.
Right.
They don't know how to coach and develop, right? Because they themselves haven't gotten that training. So I think that's where the failure, that's where the disconnect starts happening, right? And instead, because I've read so many researches and I've studied so much about, if somebody is an incredible employee, and this is my experience, and they do such a great job at what they do, like seriously, they're the best. And they come to you and they're like, listen, I need to make a little more money. I'm having, surgery, or I'm having a child, or whatever life throws at them. And you say, well, let's look into giving you that, right? And keeping that person as that incredible contributor versus transferring them into a leadership role where they're going to fail, and then you're going to lose the employee because
100%.
they end up leaving because they don't like what they're
Yeah.
doing. They're like, I don't want to lead people, this is hard, right?
And that's why I've always been a fan of creating that individual contributor track, so people who don't want to
Absolutely.
be leaders can actually still progress in their career within an organization. But sometimes those are fewer and far between, and you're always getting pushed toward that leadership track. So I think
Right.
companies are short-sighted a little bit when they don't think outside the box about what people want, and having some diverse options that can still have a huge impact on the business. You don't always, to your point, don't have to be a leader.
It's a learning experience, and not a lot of companies really want to do the effort of what you just said, right? Let's do a
Hmm.
track that has to do with individual contributors and grow them from there, right? And just think outside the box. That's the most important thing. We got to think outside the box. You got to.
100%. I'd love to go back just for a second to something you said a minute ago, and you referenced, different generations in the workplace. And it made me think about, we saw in, the past, say, 6 months to a year, a lot of Gen Z employees were getting fired or not even hired. And there was lots of talk about, different communications, disconnect with the generations. What would you say to somebody who's like, maybe like the guy who works for me, Will, he's graduating college this semester, right? And I don't want him to leave. But if he goes and gets a real job, what would you say to him about integrating into the workplace from a generational perspective and interfacing with, different generations?
I would say to embrace all the different generations, embrace and learn from them, right? Don't combat, don't ignore, just learn. I'm actually seeing a lot of the Generation Z that's coming into the workforce being very receptive to learning,
Okay.
being very proud to be in an organization and having gotten that opportunity to grow within the organization. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm very, very impressed with Generation Z. I truly am.
Nice.
I think it's a new generation that's coming into the workforce. Again, my theory is, this is the generation that went through COVID and they were at home, right? So if they were in
Yeah.
school, if they were in college, in high school, wherever they were at that time, and they felt that loneliness, they don't want that. They want to come to work, they want to
Yep.
socialize, they want to interact, they want to have that face connection, which we enjoy that piece of the puzzle. So we're seeing quite a difference in this generation, and I'm excited for them because they're very impactful and they're sponges. They love to learn, so they're embracing every different generation. So I think they're in the right track, if you ask me. Because you know what, if you go up to a person, let's say they're a boomer and they have this great way of doing a certain project at work, sit with them, say, hey, can I spend some time with you, can you teach me what you're learning? That person's going to be so impressed by the ask, and then that Generation Z is going to learn so much from that employee and vice versa,
Yep.
because they're going to input, and
Yes.
the boomer is going to learn from Z. So it's I think that I've heard a few companies that are starting to do that, where they're building teams where they have people from all the different generations, and it's becoming so productive. They're testing it, right? They're doing pilots of, let's try this, let's see what happens.
Hmm.
And the teams that are having people from every generation are becoming very impactful, to be honest with you. And it makes sense. It truly does make
Yeah.
sense.
And I think some people that will, you've heard phrases like "okay, boomer," or conversely, whatever negative comments that older people can say about younger people, right? And I think
Right.
when people hide behind those, they're missing out, like you were just saying, on the back and forth learning from each other that can take place.
Right.
And
Right.
frankly, I think it's more fun to hang out with somebody who's the opposite of my demographic. Because if I'm
Absolutely.
hanging out with a homogenous group, it's kind of like just this group think. And what are we missing that, if we had a different perspective?
100%. And it works every, like you said, every generation. And especially us in HR. I mean, we have to be so receptive to that, because we're getting
Yeah.
people walking into our office from every generation. So we got to be very versed in how do they think? How do they
Yep.
function? What makes them tick, right? That's the most important piece of the puzzle. Because if somebody from a certain generation comes into my office and it's not my generation, I got to know what they're thinking and how to connect with
Yeah.
them, right? And if they can't connect with you because you're looking at them with this stare that, like a deer in headlights, you're like, what? They're gonna disconnect right away. They're gonna be like, okay, I can't talk to this person. They don't get me, right? So
Right.
especially for us in HR, we gotta embrace all the different generations and be open to what they bring to the table.
Agreed. You got to flex. You got to meet the moment with who you're talking to, and I think
Absolutely.
that's where a good HR person will have that empathy built in to really seek to understand
Right.
where they're coming from, and then adjust their coaching or whatever you want to call it to meet that moment and actually help that person versus them just shutting down and, okay, I'm out. I did my HR time. Now I'm going to move on. Right.
Correct. Correct. They don't care about me. It ain't gonna change, and then what happens? exactly what we were going to talk about. They become quiet quitters, right?
Well,
When they're
yeah,
not
perfect
happy
segue,
anymore.
right?
Yeah, perfect. Like,
I was just reading a comment on one of my other videos from a viewer who, and they were talking about PIPs in terms of, which for those who haven't been on one or who don't know, is a performance improvement plan, which is no
right.
fun for anybody involved.
No, not
And
at all.
it's usually not a good sign. Let's just put it that way. But the person was commenting that, she was surprised that some people are surprised they're getting put on a PIP. And I couldn't agree with her more. The PIP should not be a surprise. If you've got a good leader, that leader should be giving you feedback along the way and invested authentically in your development. And if you're not picking that up and changing, or whatever the conversation, the feedback is, that's where you're going to get put on a PIP, because leaders have done all they can and they've still got to move the business forward. So what's been your experience with employees who are quiet quitting, disengaged, whatever you want to call it?
Well, you hit it on the nail. Let's go back to what you just said, right? It should be no surprise if a leader is going to put you on a PIP, right? If they're going to put you on a
Yeah.
PIP, you and you're surprised, that means you're not dealing with the right leader, right? We did something that we didn't develop that leader to have those difficult conversations. And I'm a strong believer that most leaders shy away from difficult conversations. So I'll give you one example. I had a manager that kind of said that I need to terminate this employee because they've been late constantly, and I said, well, looking into his information, he's been an extraordinary employee, excellent employee. He's been with us for 13 years. He's gotten a above average every evaluation. So all of a sudden, he's not connecting. What's going on? So I said, what's the underlying issue? Go find out for me. So he says, okay, fine, I'll go find out. So he came back to me and he said, Anthony, you were right. And he said, well, he had to sell his car because his wife was diagnosed with cancer and he was taking public transportation. So it was very unreliable. Sometimes I would get here in 15 minutes early, sometimes I would get there 15 minutes late. And I said, okay, let's pause for a second. Could you
Yeah.
imagine if you would have terminated this employee? They've been loyal to the company, they've been an excellent employee, and just because they've been late, you were going to terminate him without knowing what was his situation. And imagine what stress you would have caused in his life. So I said, so what could we do to help him? And he said, well, we can change his shift. We can, move it 30 minutes ahead, or we can, whatever it is. I said, perfect. Then that's all you need to do. He went back, they did that, and the employee was so thankful. He was thriving. He wasn't stressed anymore because he was getting to work on time, and everything turned out great, right? So it
Yeah.
goes back to that. Caring about your employees, knowing your employees, and having those conversations, right? Being transparent, going back to what we talked about in the beginning, and just saying, hey, if we have those regular one on ones, those follow up talks, and say, hey, I need you to work a little harder on this because I've seen that
Hmm.
you're not delivering what I was looking for. But let me tell you what I was looking for. So it goes back to being
Yeah.
crystal clear with your expectations, right? Because people
100%.
are not mind readers, right? But how many times have you sat with an employee that says, my leader never sat with me? Like, I don't know what he wants or she wants, right? Um, so shame on us. Shame on us for letting employees not know what's expected of them.
Yeah, and as a leader in that example, I would also my coaching to them would be, I if you don't know this about your employee, do they trust you enough to tell you? So I would use
Correct.
that as a teaching moment and say, you've got to start creating a better trusting relationship with your employees, so this doesn't come out of this isn't, you're not blind to stuff like this, that what's going on, and we don't have to get to the conversation where you're firing them. You come and say, hey, Anthony, I've got this employee, he's got XYZ personal issues, help me work through some possible solutions. I'm there for that conversation all day
Oh,
long.
absolutely. All day. All day. I agree with you. Because that's the leader that wants to grow. That's the leader that wants to be a better leader, right? And they
Right.
know that we have tools to provide for them. And they embrace that, and they come to ask for advice. That I love that. I love that because I always tell my leaders, I always say, let's be proactive instead of reactive, right? Let's get ahead of the game.
100%.
Come to me, ask me the questions, I'll help you find the solution, and then we don't have to have a problem at the end of the conversation. So it's about teaching them.
I've talked to many leaders. They're like, well, I should have all the answers. I shouldn't have to come ask for help. And
Why?
quite frankly, you asking for help is not a sign of weakness and
At
is not
all.
going to be like a demerit, against you from a leadership perspective. I think, quite frankly, it's the contrary. You look like a stronger person and a stronger leader and a
Absolutely.
better leader if you actually ask for help. That's a position of strength, in my humble opinion.
100%. I mean, we can't preach that enough, right? You got to be vulnerable. You got to be.
Yep.
I personally think from the all the leaders that I've worked with, and I've worked with C suites, and I've worked with every type of leader. The leaders that are vulnerable and they're themselves, right? I am so impressed by them, right? Because I see them as strong individuals, right? Because if somebody can be vulnerable, they're strong. There is no weakness there at all, right?
Yeah.
They're not wearing the mask, they're not hiding, they're just being themselves. And I've seen those type of leaders thrive in organizations and become really big leaders in the organization.
Right. And
100%.
suddenly they're a destination or a targeted destination for high performing employees today. I want to be on that team. And then they're
Come.
known as an exporter of talent to other
Mhm.
areas in the organization, which helps with retention, all the type of things. So, a good leader can be so good for the organization, but in contrary, the bad leader is a bit of a cancer, right, in the
A
organization
100%.
because
And now I'm
it
going to
just
pose a question to you. How
sure.
do we know? How do we know? Because we've been doing this so long, when we continuously lose people from a department, right? And we
Hmm.
go to the person that leads that leader and say to them, hey, I really think you need to spend some time with that person, that leader, because there's a problem. They continuously lose people in their work group. There's a reason why that's happening, right?
And it's
Yeah.
usually couched with, okay, Rob, I hear you. They're losing people, but they deliver, right? They get great results.
There you
The
go.
bottom line, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, but at what cost to the business? Because
Correct.
they have such a bad reputation. They lead through fear. If
Yeah.
we think about leadership in a company, is this what we say our values are in action? It would be my question. And the answer always was, well, no, you've got a point. They're more command and control or fear based, and that's not
Right.
who we say we are as a company. I'm like, well, I get that you're saying they get results, but on the flip side, you've got to address the how. And you're not being a good leader if you're not addressing this person and helping them get better as a leader as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Listen, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist to fix it. All you got to do, if
No.
that person's an incredible producer, get them an executive coach. Get somebody that
Yeah.
will spend time with them to work on that deficiency. If they're amazing at one thing, but they're failing at another, why not invest the money instead of losing all these people? Because we're losing so much money when people are walking out the door, right? It's about now you have to recruit again. Now you have to put them through onboarding. Now you have to get. So instead of spending the money on that, let's spend the money on training these leaders to be the best they could be, right? Now you get
Yeah.
the best of all of it. You get the best of their production, you get the best of their attitude. Now they're truly leading people, and it's a win-win for everyone. And I could tell you that I had one experience where this leader was thought of as the jerk, uh,
Mhm.
led by intimidation, fear, everything you can describe. We would walk to the location, right, and people would just stand still, and they you could tell that their body, their actual body would change. They would become stiff, and then I would walk in behind them, and they're like, oh, hi, how are you? And I would go and greet every single person in the store, right? And I would say, hi, how are you? How you doing? And they're like, oh my God, I wish that that person would be like you because you seem to appreciate us. So That was the feedback I gave him at the end of the day. I said, people, you walk into a store and you don't go greet the people that produce you money. You go straight to talk to the manager, right? And when you're
Right.
doing that, you're forgetting about the people that are interacting with your customers are your employees. And you're not talking to them. And you're disregarding them. And you're treating them as if they're beneath you. So at the end of the 3 days, I gave him a real life example and I told him exactly what people thought of him. And I didn't hold back. I said every phrase that I've heard. He's an asshole. He's a jerk. We don't like him. He's arrogant. Everything. And that gentleman sat in front of me and wept. Seriously,
Oh,
cried for about 10 to 15 minutes. And I said, listen, feedback is a gift. What are we going to do from here? What can we do differently? How can I support you? What can I do to get you to a place where people don't think of you this way? Because after spending 3 days with you and knowing who you are, right? Because when you get that windshield time, you get to know people very well. I said,
totally.
you're a pretty amazing individual. You have a heart of gold, but they're not seeing that piece of you that you showed me. And fair enough. I mean, he took it to heart, and I will tell you that he made a big change, a big change. And he would come to me and say, hey, I'm struggling with this. What do I do? Can you come out with me? Can you do? So, you know, it's sometimes that they don't know that they're viewed in this light.
Yeah.
They don't know.
Yeah, I just share a quick moment with a leader I had at Boeing who, again, we were polar opposites. He was my client. And two things. I asked him why he hired me. And he said, because I wasn't the same as he had been force fed throughout his whole career at the company. I was very
Right.
different, and he felt that that would challenge him. And then when I left, he was mad. I mean, he wouldn't talk to me when I announced I was leaving for like a week. But he sent me a note, and I still have it, and it said, "You have no idea how much you've changed me because of the relationship he and I had and everything you just said where we were, I was like, dude, that did not land well. You've got to approach
Right.
this different, right? And I think it meant a lot to me that I had an impact on him and but he was receptive to it. And we all know people that you can tell them all this stuff. They're not going to weep. They're just going to double down and go back to their corner. And you got to meet, if you're a leader and that you're needing coaching, you've got to meet some people halfway, whether it's their HR person, a coach, or whatever it is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
So what about, kind of our last topic is about the role of HR as a bit of a therapist. I've been called worse. Um, but, you know, mental health is so top of mind, creating a safe workplace, right? For, your mental safety, that type of stuff. Um, how is that kind of played into your day to day now? Is it is it a topic that's talked about a lot, and how do you kind of attack it head on? What's coming up on that topic for you?
So I've worked in organizations where they've embraced it and they want somebody
Hmm.
on staff to be there just in case somebody's having a meltdown or somebody's going through a difficult time in their life. And I'll tell you one organization that did have a mental health practitioner in the facility and at headquarters. At the beginning, it was a struggle, right? Because people didn't feel comfortable because they're like, if I go talk to this person, they're going to divulge the information that I share with them of what I'm going through in my life, and
Totally.
I could lose my job, right? So it was more about, I'll tell you, it took a little bit of time before that person built trust with people. And what they would do is they would go and sit in areas where people were having lunch. They would walk around, they would say hi to everyone, they would talk to people till little by little, like somebody would take it upon themselves to go set up an appointment and go see them. And then that started spreading where people were like, oh my God, it was so beneficial. And I feel so much better at work. I'm less stressed. I was able to kind of, gather my thoughts. They gave me some new perspectives. What? So I've seen it work really well. I'll tell you another experience was during COVID. And you know that working in a healthcare organization during those times was very
Oh my
difficult.
gosh.
But what I did was I made it a point to have the EAP therapist, and they would send me different ones every week, but having them in house, right? Just in
Hmm.
case the stress that our healthcare practitioners were going through was so difficult, and you would feel for them, and having somebody there that they could speak to made a world of a difference. And they really did utilize it at that point. They didn't care if they told the company what they were going through. People were so stressed and so frightened at
Sure.
that point that they were talking to whoever I brought in, right? So whoever they provide, the EAP program would provide me, and I would put them in a separate place outside of sight, where people wouldn't see people walking in and out, and they were being utilized to uh, the umph. They were really being utilized. So, and then the people that have taken the advice and have used it have come back to me and said, "Oh my God, it's made such a huge difference in my life." And I said, "Well, tell
Yep.
your friends, tell your colleagues, right? Because people need to hear it."
I think the stigma has gone down, right? I can remember, maybe even as close as a decade ago, where if that got out that you were doing that, or even leveraging an executive coach, that could have a bad connotation, right? Or the rumors could start, that type of stuff. So I do believe maybe that some of that exists somewhere, but I think by and large the stigma is not what it used to be. And funny enough, we had an executive coach at Starbucks in headquarters, and she had this random office that was like, two doors, two locked doors, and down this really desolate hallway that you had to like, it was like, secret knock the whole thing just to get in there and make
It
an
was like the
appointment. And I think,
speakeasy.
yeah, and I think, but people were so afraid of the internal politics and everything, and I was like, that's a bunch of nonsense. If you need help, go get it, and then get better, and then it's a non-issue.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a win-win for everybody, for you, for the company, for the employees. I mean, it's a win-win. And the whole therapist piece, having a mental health person in the workplace, I think that speaks volumes to the employees. That says, hey, my organization cares about me, right? They care about my well-being, my mental health, right?
Right.
And especially in an era where we're living that people are so disconnected, right? And that could be that one person that offers them support, and that could change their life, and they will be grateful to the company for that, right? And the company
Mhm.
didn't do anything but just provide that mental health practitioner.
That's a good place to wrap up, because I think some people could be watching this and say, well, my that's not my workplace. My workplace is toxic, right? Or that wouldn't go over well. I think people have a good sense of what kind of organization they're in, because they're not all our organizations are high trust organizations and everything. So,
Absolutely.
I wish they were, but I'm a realist. They're not. And so
Right.
I think, if you're in a toxic environment, it is weighing on your health. And if they're just doing the stuff that we've talked about for to say, look, we did this, but we really don't believe it, then you have a
Right.
problem. Maybe it's time to look for a better job, right?
Absolutely.
If you can't change them, what can you change in that equation? You can change what your circumstances are, and your mental
Absolutely.
health, and your, you know, all that stuff that makes you you is more important than trying to stick it out at X company. Um,
I agree with you
so
100%.
I think one thing that's woven through our conversation, which I'm so glad you brought up, because I hadn't thought about it in a while, was the whole speed of trust thing and how
Yeah.
important it underpins everything we do. And if we're
Yes.
in a high trust environment, it's more enjoyable. We get to know people we, maybe wouldn't get to know otherwise. And
Correct.
it becomes a place that we really want to stay. We're not going to be looking for, oh, I've got to go here or there. My needs are getting filled here, and
Yep.
I want to stay here. So, if you're in a high trust organization, that's great, and stay. Otherwise, seek those organizations out. Make sure
Yeah.
that if you know people working at there, hey, is that a great place? Does it really, is the reality of that place as good as it sounds? And if people are saying yes, then that's a place you want to target.
I couldn't agree with you more. And And when you incorporate that whole trust, right, you build such strong teams, right? And it spills over to the rest of the organization, right? So teams start spreading and it starts spilling into other teams. And it goes back to, I always use the example of one of the pieces of the puzzle with speed of trust was, if you were my colleague and I went to another colleague of ours and I was talking ill about you, right? Oh my God, you should see what
Yeah.
Rob did the other day. And that person would say, hold on, stop for a second. If Rob was standing here with us, would you tell me what you're going to tell me right now? And they're like, oh well, no. And then I said, okay, we need to stop this conversation. I don't want to have it.
Right.
Right. So that makes you feel like if you're working in an environment like that, you're like, wow, I could trust people, right? That they're not going to be speaking
Yeah.
ill about me behind my back. So you work more efficiently. You take off the mask and you're more of who you are, right? Because people are not going to talk bad about you, right? You bring something to the organization. Every single employee brings something unique to the organization. And if that person can thrive and be themselves, I think that you can't stop that organization. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be, people
Right.
from all walks of life. It's going to be so impactful. Um, but instead, if you don't have an organization that has that the trust factor, people fear and they wear the mask and they do what they're asked to do and they don't go above and beyond and they don't showcase their talent because they're like, how about if they don't like it, or how about if they are going to judge me, right? And you got to take people for where they're at in their life. At a certain point in our lives, we don't care what people say. I truly don't care what people think about me. I am who I am, and if you like me, awesome. If you don't, shame on you. That's on you, not on
Yeah.
me.
Totally.
So yeah, so I wouldn't I would agree with you 100%. That was one of the most biggest impactful lessons to me working in an organization was the speed of trust.
Yeah, and the other thing too, if you work in a high trust environment, suddenly you don't get the case of the Sunday scaries where you're like, oh crap,
No,
it's Monday, I don't want to go, and all the things, right? It impacts so many aspects of your life. So my
it's true.
advice: find a company, find a leader that is you can extend trust to, that will extend trust to you, and you'll be better for it. Is my
No doubt.
overall advice. And check out The Speed of Trust. I'm going to link the stuff in the description here because it's an easy read,
It
the
really
book. And
is.
I think you could even just thumb through it, pick a chapter, cherry pick a chapter, and actually implement it and see results fairly quickly. That's how much I know the two of us believe in it. And
Yeah,
who knew? I got a binder from there that I actually used and opened. Oh, wait. They may not know what binders are. Remember,
that's true. That's true. That's true.
maybe I'm dating myself, but well,
That
hey,
is fun.
on that note, I have to maybe have you come back because we didn't get to my lightning round, but
But
I've
I've
got
got
a
a
hard
hard
stop
stop.
coming up.
Fair
So
enough.
you're always welcome back. It was so
Thank
great
you.
seeing you, my friend, and
For sure.
I appreciate the time, and especially on an evening on a school night. So, but thank you, and again, everybody, check out The Speed of Trust. And again, my name's Rob. I'm on a mission to help to share what we've learned at these great companies with you to get that promotion, land the dream job, or just survive. So until next time, I hope you're surviving corporate America, and take care. Bye. This video was recorded and produced by Just Talk Studios, the premier video podcasting studio in Bellevue, Washington. Visit justtalkstudios.com to learn more and book your session today.